There's something I've always found fascinating about people who become legends. Not the fame, not the trophies, but that strange mix of simplicity and obsession that pushes them far beyond what anyone would call normal. Ronnie Coleman was one of those people. When you look at him now, the giant with 8 Mr. Olympia titles, the man who redefined what the human body could look like, it's easy to forget how ordinary his story began. He wasn't born into money. He didn't grow up surrounded by champions. He was just a kid from Bastrop, Louisiana, raised in a family where hard work wasn't something to brag about. It was simply how life worked, and that attitude stuck with him. Before bodybuilding, Ronnie was a college student majoring in accounting. Yeah, accounting. He played a bit of football at Grambling State University, strong and fast, but nothing about him screamed future legend. After graduation, he worked as a police officer in Arlington, Texas. It wasn't glamorous, long hours, dangerous calls, and not much sleep. But even then, that quiet grind started shaping the person he'd become. He didn't find bodybuilding. Bodybuilding found him. A coworker noticed the guy's size and strength and told him about a local gym, Metroflex. Ronnie didn't have the money for a membership, but the gym owner, Brian Dobson, offered him a deal. Compete in a bodybuilding show, and you can train here for free. That's how one of the greatest stories in sports history started, with a free gym membership. I like that detail. It says a lot, because it shows that greatness doesn't always start with a dream or a plan. Sometimes it starts with something as small as saying, why not? Metroflex wasn't some modern fitness center. It was hot, loud, and smelled like metal and effort. The kind of place that would chew you up if you weren't serious. But Ronnie didn't just survive there, he thrived. He trained after long police shifts, sometimes still wearing his uniform pants. He wasn't chasing fame or followers. There were no cameras, no audience, just a man and the weights. And here's the thing. That's what I respect the most. When no one's watching, when no one's cheering, when there's no reason to keep going, except that little voice inside that says, do it again. That's where legends are built. People like to romanticize it later, as if he always knew what he was doing. But he didn't. He just kept showing up, day after day. He didn't talk about sacrifice or motivation. He lived it. There's a kind of honesty in that. When you lift, not because you have to, but because you need to. Not for others, but for yourself. And for Ronnie, that feeling became his compass. In his first competitions, he didn't win much. The physiques on stage were sharper, more conditioned, more polished. He was just a strong guy who hadn't learned the art of posing yet. But he didn't quit. That's another thing about him. He didn't see failure as a wall, only as a direction to push against. As the months went by, his physique started to change. The density, the shape, the raw power. It was becoming something else entirely. There's footage of him training back then. No music, no cinematic editing, just sweat and sound. You can hear the plates shaking, the breath breaking through gritted teeth. And what strikes me most is how calm he looks, like he's somewhere else, focused, lost in a place most people never reach. That's something I think about a lot, the way he trained. Ronnie wasn't just lifting weights, he was testing limits. Not because he had to prove something to anyone, but because he genuinely wanted to see how far the human body could go. That curiosity, mixed with his insane work ethic, became his secret weapon. When people talk about greatness, they often imagine some grand moment, a revelation, a spark of destiny. But for Ronnie, it was repetition, the boring, endless, unseen repetition. And that's where most people stop. They want results, not the process. He wanted the process. That mindset carried him from being just a big cop in Texas to one of the most respected physiques in the sport. Slowly, the small local shows turned into bigger ones. The trophies started appearing, but more importantly, people began to notice something different about him. Not just his size, but his energy, his attitude. Because even when he started winning, he didn't change. Still that same guy cracking jokes, helping others in the gym, never talking down to anyone. It's rare. Most people, when they start climbing, forget where they came from. Ronnie never did. There's a story that sums it up perfectly. Even at the peak of his career, when he was already an IFBB pro, he kept working as a police officer. Imagine that, the strongest man on the planet still putting on a uniform and patrolling the streets. Not for money, not for fame, because that's who he was. Grounded, real. To me, that's what makes his beginning so powerful. It's not about where he started. It's about what he carried with him from those days. The humility, the discipline, the refusal to act like he was special, even when he clearly was. When I think about that early part of his journey, I realize it's not just a story about bodybuilding. It's a story about what happens when you keep doing the right thing long enough, even if no one's watching. It's about how the smallest decisions, showing up, staying consistent, not quitting, can quietly rewrite the direction of your entire life. That's what the beginning of Ronnie's legend really is. Not a fairy tale, not destiny, just persistence made visible. And maybe that's why his story still hits so hard years later. Because somewhere inside, we all know what that feels like. That fight to keep going when nothing seems to move. The grind that no one claps for. He lived that for years before the world noticed. And when it finally did, the foundation was already built. Solid. Unshakable. That's where we leave this part of his story. In that small, dusty gym in Texas, where a police officer unknowingly began transforming into a symbol of unstoppable drive. Because the truth is, before the legend, before the titles, before the pain, there was just a man who loved the work. Every story of greatness has that one moment. The shift when things stop being a hobby and start becoming destiny. For Ronnie Coleman, that moment didn't arrive with fireworks or big headlines. It came quietly, the way most life-changing things do, disguised as a small opportunity that only made sense later. He had been training at Metroflex for years now. The gym had become a second home, the place where his real life began after the badge came off. He wasn't a pro, not even close, just a local competitor with freakish strength and a reputation for being the hardest worker in the room. But there was something about him that people couldn't ignore anymore. The density, the shape, the pure mass. It was starting to look unreal. Brian Dobson, the gym owner, had been pushing him to go further. "You've got something special, man," he told him more than once. But Ronnie wasn't the type to chase glory. He was cautious, humble to a fault. To him, competing was a side thing, not a dream. Until that one show, the 1990 Mr. Texas. He entered it without big expectations. Just another challenge, another reason to push harder. But that night, something changed. Ronnie walked on stage and didn't just compete. He owned it. He took first place in the heavyweight class and the overall title. The crowd wasn't just cheering for his size, they were reacting to his presence. That calm, confident look. The energy that said, "I've earned every ounce of this." It wasn't just a trophy, it was validation. The realization that this thing he loved wasn't just passion, it was potential. That night became his first turning point. Still, even after winning, he went back to work the next day like nothing happened. That's something I love about Ronnie's story. The man could conquer a stage on Saturday and be back on patrol by Monday, writing traffic tickets like the world hadn't just shifted under his feet. He didn't see himself as special, and maybe that's why he became exactly that. But success has a way of finding those who earn it. Soon, the IFBB noticed him. The amateur wins started stacking up, and in 1991, he got his pro card after winning the World Amateur Championships in Poland. It was official. Officer Coleman had become a professional bodybuilder, and yet what followed wasn't a fairy tale rise. His first few years as a pro were rough. He placed low, barely made a mark, sometimes didn't even qualify for the main events. While others in his generation, guys like Kevin Levrone, Flex Wheeler, Sean Ray, were becoming stars, Ronnie was struggling to stand out. But here's what's crazy. He didn't complain. He didn't quit. He just kept training. Harder, heavier, longer. He once said, "Everybody wants to be a bodybuilder, but don't nobody want to lift no heavy-ass weights." That wasn't a slogan. That was his life philosophy. Ronnie didn't care about shortcuts, didn't chase coaches or trends. He trusted the iron. And maybe that's why, while everyone else was looking for the perfect program, he was quietly building something no one had seen before. A physique that combined impossible mass with granite hardness. In 1995, something started to click. His body was transforming again. Thicker, sharper, more complete. He wasn't just strong anymore. He looked like a force of nature. By 1997, his reputation in the gym world was growing fast. Even other pros began noticing. People were starting to whisper that maybe, just maybe, there was something monstrous brewing in Texas, and they were right. Then came 1998, the year everything changed. The reigning champion, Dorian Yates, retired after years of dominance. The throne was empty. Few expected Ronnie to take it. He wasn't the favorite, not even close. Most predicted Flex Wheeler would win. Flex was aesthetic perfection, symmetrical, graceful, like a sculpture come to life. Ronnie, by contrast, was raw, dense, unpolished. A worker, not a star. But when he walked onto that Olympia stage, everything changed. The lights hit him, the crowd went silent. And for the first time, the world saw what happens when unstoppable effort meets perfect timing. Ronnie Coleman, the police officer from Texas who'd been placing outside the top 10, shocked everyone. He won. Mr. Olympia. That moment, that's not just a win. That's a revolution. Because it wasn't supposed to happen. He didn't have hype behind him. No big sponsors, no media push, no special treatment. He had grit, work, and years of being overlooked. And when the trophy was in his hands, that smile, the big, genuine, disbelieving grin, said everything. It wasn't arrogance. It was gratitude, shock, joy. He had climbed the mountain nobody thought he could. But if you look closer, the real magic wasn't just in the victory. It was in what he did after. He didn't stop. He didn't celebrate for long. He went right back to training. Same gym, same people, same mindset. That's the kind of thing that separates the great from the legends. Most people, once they reach the top, ease up a little. Ronnie did the opposite. He tightened the screws. The next few years would prove that his first Olympia wasn't luck. It was the beginning of a dynasty. Looking back, I think that's the part that inspires me the most. Not the moment he won, but the years when he didn't. The quiet grind, the years of being the other guy. Because anyone can fight when the world believes in them. But to keep fighting when no one does, that's something else. That's the real turning point. Not the night he lifted the Sandow trophy, but all the nights before it, when he trained in silence, without applause, believing only in effort itself. And that's why, to this day, Ronnie's story isn't just about bodybuilding. It's about the beauty of slow, stubborn progress. It's about the long years that teach you how to handle success when it finally arrives. The 1998 Olympia wasn't just a title. It was proof that a man who refuses to quit eventually forces the world to notice. And from that moment on, there was no going back. The quiet cop from Texas had become the strongest bodybuilder the planet had ever seen. But as history shows, the higher you climb, the more the air starts to thin. And for Ronnie, the years ahead would test not just his body, but the very spirit that built it. After that night in 1998, nothing in bodybuilding was the same. Ronnie Coleman didn't just win the Olympia, he reset the standard. Every competitor standing next to him that evening realized they weren't just up against another athlete anymore. They were up against a new definition of possible. That victory wasn't an accident, and it wasn't luck. It was the result of years of repetition, pain, and quiet obsession. The kind that doesn't ask for recognition, it just demands more work. And the most surprising thing? He still didn't act like a superstar. The day after his first Olympia win, he went back to Metroflex. No cameras, no press, no entourage, just him, the same weights, the same sweat-stained floor. That's who he was. He once said, "Everybody wants to be a bodybuilder, but nobody wants to lift heavy-ass weights." It became his catchphrase, funny on the surface, but underneath it was pure truth. Because Ronnie didn't train to look strong. He trained to be strong. His workouts were the stuff of legend. 800-pound deadlifts for reps. Squats so heavy the bar bent like it was made of rubber. Leg presses stacked with more plates than physics should allow. When people asked him why he pushed that hard, he just smiled and said, "Because I can." It wasn't arrogance, it was purpose. That's what made the early 2000s his era. From 1998 to 2005, Ronnie Coleman became unstoppable. 8 consecutive Mr. Olympia titles. Each year, the standard went higher. More size, more conditioning, more impossible. And the craziest part is that he didn't do it with the resources others had. No elite facilities, no high-tech recovery, no special treatment. Just a hardcore gym in Texas, no air conditioning, 90 degrees inside, and a man who believed pain was just part of the price. Watching his training footage even today feels unreal. No theatrics, no fake motivation. Just that deep, raw sound of plates clanging, air being sucked in between sets, and his voice breaking through the noise. Yeah, buddy. Lightweight, baby. Those phrases became more than gym memes. They became symbols, not of lifting, but of a mindset. They said, no matter how heavy life gets, you face it with a grin and lift it anyway. And that, to me, is the essence of his rise. He wasn't chasing perfection. He was chasing limits. And when you do that long enough, you start to become something people can't ignore. But what made Ronnie truly unique wasn't just the size or the strength. It was how he carried it. Even as the most dominant athlete in his sport, he stayed the same humble, polite guy. He'd train with anyone who asked, give advice to random gym goers, laugh with fans like he'd known them for years. That kind of authenticity doesn't fade. There's a story from one of his training partners. They said, he could have been arrogant. He had every right to be. But instead, he was the first one in and the last one out. That's the difference between someone chasing fame and someone living their purpose. By 2003, he had reached a form that people still talk about today. That year, many call it the peak. 287 pounds of shredded muscle, every fiber carved and dry, like a statue made of steel and sweat. It didn't even seem human. For most athletes, reaching that level would mean backing off afterward, protecting the body, coasting on the legacy. Ronnie went the other way. He trained harder, he lifted heavier, he refused to acknowledge the idea of enough. And that's where his story becomes something more than sport. Because the rise isn't just about dominance, it's about what happens when passion crosses the line into obsession. He loved what he did so much that stopping felt like betrayal. He once said, if I could go back, I'd do it all over again. Every rep, every injury, every surgery. That's not the voice of a man blinded by pride. That's the voice of someone who found peace in purpose, even when it hurt. But beneath that greatness, the cost was already forming. Years of pushing impossible weights left invisible cracks in his body. Discs began to wear down, joints started to rebel, and nerves whispered warnings he refused to hear. He kept going anyway, because that's who Ronnie was, the man who didn't believe in limits until they broke him. Still, during those years, he stood as a living symbol of what human effort could achieve. People from outside bodybuilding started following his story, not because they cared about muscle symmetry or competition placings, but because they saw something deeply human in him, the courage to give absolutely everything for something you love. That's what always struck me about Ronnie. He wasn't a character built for a fitness ad. He was real, a man who smiled through pain, who treated strangers with kindness, who didn't use his success to look down on anyone. In an industry often built on ego, he somehow stayed pure. When I look at that phase of his career, his prime, his rise, I don't just see a dominant athlete. I see the embodiment of a mindset that's becoming rare today. The idea that greatness isn't supposed to be comfortable, that progress doesn't care about convenience. Because the truth is, what made Ronnie Coleman so inspiring wasn't that he won 8 Olympias. It's that he did it his way, the hard, honest way. When you strip away the medals and the lights, what remains is a guy who loved to train more than he loved to win. And that's what makes him unforgettable. The rise of Ronnie Coleman wasn't about becoming the biggest. It was about proving that dedication, real, unbreakable dedication, still exists in a world obsessed with shortcuts. And maybe that's why, even now, when people watch those old training clips, they still feel something. Because deep down, everyone recognizes that spark, that moment when effort turns into identity. But as every rise comes with a shadow, so did his. The same drive that took him to the top was the one that refused to let him rest. And when the body started to break, the mind had already decided there was no going back. That's where the story begins to shift again, from triumph to endurance, from glory to survival. Because for Ronnie, the true measure of strength wasn't in how much he could lift, but in how much he could take. Between 1998 and 2005, Ronnie Coleman didn't just dominate bodybuilding, he defined it. Those 8 consecutive Mr. Olympia titles weren't just victories, they were statements. Every year, the sport's best showed up hoping the king might finally slow down, and every year, Ronnie made sure they left disappointed. He didn't defend the title, he reinvented it. Each season, he came in heavier, harder, sharper, a living contradiction that shouldn't have been possible. 280 pounds on stage, with the detail and conditioning of a man 50 pounds lighter. No one had seen anything like it before. People began calling it the Coleman era, and they weren't exaggerating. Every time he walked on stage, the crowd knew they were about to witness something beyond human. The cheers weren't just for a bodybuilder, they were for the embodiment of discipline itself. But here's what makes this part of his story so powerful. While the world was busy turning him into a myth, Ronnie never saw himself that way. He still lived in Texas, still trained at Metroflex, still drove the same car, ate the same food, talked the same way. There was no superstar bubble, no entourage, no distance between him and the real world. He could walk into a store and chat with strangers like it was nothing. That groundedness, that refusal to become someone else, made his success even more magnetic. The fans saw it. They could feel it. Because behind the monstrous physique was someone who seemed genuinely happy. Happy to work, to suffer, to keep proving what the human body and mind could do. During those years, his training reached mythical levels. When most pros were dialing back intensity to preserve longevity, Ronnie was doing the opposite. He squatted 800 pounds for 2 reps, deadlifted the same weight multiple times, leg pressed over 2,000 pounds, 8 reps deep. The footage of those lifts became part of bodybuilding legend. No fancy production, no special effects, just a man and the sound of gravity giving up for a few seconds. Every rep looked like it could snap him in half, yet every time he stood up smiling, saying, "Yeah, buddy, ain't nothing but a peanut." That phrase, "nothing but a peanut," said everything about how he saw life. The weight, the pain, the exhaustion. To him, it was just another rep, another challenge, another day in the office. But even as his legend grew, so did the expectations. People wanted more every year, bigger, freakier, sharper. And the pressure wasn't just external, it was inside him too. He didn't want to repeat success. He wanted to outdo himself. That's the thing about chasing greatness. The bar keeps moving. And when you're already the best, the only person left to beat is your own reflection. By the early 2000s, Ronnie's physique had become so unreal that even judges didn't know how to score him anymore. His combination of size and conditioning redefined what winning shape meant. He wasn't just breaking records, he was bending the entire sport around him. But behind the stage lights, the cost was growing. Years of heavy training had started leaving marks that even he couldn't hide. His back ached constantly, his joints began to stiffen. Some mornings, he could barely walk to the kitchen. Still, when the camera turned on, he smiled. When the music started at Metroflex, he trained like the pain didn't exist. Because to him, it didn't. Not compared to the joy of the work. There's a quote from him around that time that I've always remembered. The body can handle a lot more than the mind thinks it can. The trick is convincing your mind to stay out of the way. That's pure Ronnie. Simple words, but layered with truth. He wasn't just talking about lifting. He was talking about life. For most people, the thought of enduring that level of pain, physical, mental, emotional, would sound like torture. For Ronnie, it was meaning. That's what the golden era really was. A paradox. A man breaking the limits of his body while somehow keeping his spirit unbroken. A living proof that joy and suffering can coexist if you love what you do enough. Even at the height of fame, he didn't care about being the greatest. He cared about getting better. There's something almost innocent in that mindset. The idea that perfection isn't a destination, just an excuse to keep trying. By 2005, Ronnie had 8 Sando trophies, tying the all-time record of Lee Haney. 8 years of dominance, 8 years of pushing the limits of human potential. For most, that would have been enough. For Ronnie, it wasn't. He still believed he could improve. That's the kind of belief that creates legends and destroys them. Because as his muscles grew, so did the damage underneath. The nerves in his spine were starting to fail. The pain was creeping closer, but when doctors told him to slow down, he laughed. "Can't stop now," he said, and he meant it. That mindset, that refusal to let go, is what made his era golden. Not just because of what he achieved, but because of how he achieved it. Through pure consistency, through faith and hard work, through the unshakable belief that you can always give more, even when there's nothing left to give. It's easy to romanticize that now, but back then, it wasn't glamorous. It was lonely. It was painful, but it was real. And maybe that's why his legacy feels so timeless. Because even though we see the giant, the myth, the unbeatable champion, underneath all that, he was still just that same guy from Texas who wanted to lift. No matter how much success he found, he never stopped being the man who earned a free gym membership and decided to see how far it could take him. That's what the golden era of Ronnie Coleman truly represents. Not perfection, not fame, not records, but the beauty of absolute commitment. The willingness to go all in, knowing it might break you, and doing it anyway. And somewhere in those years, between the titles, the screams, the 800-pound lifts, you can see the beginning of the end. Because the same fire that built him was starting to burn through him. He had become a legend. But even legends have limits. Every empire has a cost, and for Ronnie Coleman that cost came slowly. One rep, one set, one surgery at a time. By the mid-2000s, the warning signs were already there. The pain in his lower back wasn't just soreness anymore. It was deep, sharp, constant, the kind that doesn't fade with rest or stretching. But rest was never part of Ronnie's vocabulary. He used to joke about it, saying, "If it ain't hurtin', it ain't workin'," brushing off the pain like it was just another part of the grind. Yet beneath that smile, his body was breaking. Years of lifting weights that most men couldn't even dream of touching had taken their toll, collapsing discs, pinched nerves, and a spine that could no longer carry the weight of his ambition. Still he trained, still he competed, still he believed that if his mind didn't quit, his body wouldn't either. That's the thing about obsession. It doesn't ask for permission. By 2006, the pain was unbearable. He'd wake up stiff, his legs numb, sometimes unable to walk without help. But that year, he still stepped onto the Olympia stage, chasing a 9th title. He came in massive and powerful, but something was different. The same body that once looked invincible now showed the first cracks of mortality. Jay Cutler, his longtime rival, finally defeated him. After 8 years on top, the king had fallen. For most athletes, that would have been the time to retire, to rest, to protect what was left. Not Ronnie. He didn't know how to stop. He believed there was still one more version of himself left to chase. But that version never came. Instead came surgeries, one after another. Fusions, screws, metal rods. His spine rebuilt piece by piece. He's had more than a dozen operations since then, each one meant to fix something years of superhuman effort had broken. The footage of him after surgery is hard to watch. The man who once leg-pressed a car now struggling to walk down a hallway. Yet, even then, he smiles and laughs with nurses. When someone asked if he regretted anything, he said simply, "No regrets. None. I'd do it all over again." That line hits hard because it isn't bravado. It's truth. He wasn't pretending to be tough. He just was. In his world, pain was proof that he'd lived exactly the way he wanted. Few people ever get to say that. Most of us hold back, compromise, play it safe. Ronnie never did. He gave everything, literally everything, to what he loved. And that's both beautiful and terrifying. When you watch interviews from those years, you can tell he knows what he sacrificed. He's not naive or bitter. He talks like a man who made a deal and intends to keep it. That's the paradox of greatness. The same fire that lights your path eventually burns you down. But to people like Ronnie, that's the point. They don't measure life in comfort or years. They measure it in intensity and impact. He wasn't chasing longevity, he was chasing legacy. He didn't care if it hurt, if it broke him, if it ended badly, as long as it was real. In one interview, he said, "I'd rather live 5 years doing what I love than 50 doing something I don't." That's not a quote, that's a worldview. Because in the end, it's not the body that defines a man like Ronnie Coleman. It's the spirit that refused to quit, even when the body did. People ask him now if he misses the stage, the training, the spotlight. He just smiles and says, Man, I still train every day, just lighter weights. And when he says lighter, you realize it's still more than most people will ever lift. That's what makes him unique, that unshakable positivity. It's not denial, it's resilience. He doesn't dwell on what he lost, because to him he didn't lose anything. He lived it. When you see him now, walking slowly, sometimes with crutches, sometimes in a wheelchair, there's no sadness in his eyes, only peace, a quiet kind of victory. Because he knows something most people never learn. The price of greatness isn't suffering, it's commitment. And he paid it willingly. The surgeries, the pain, the long recovery, all of it is just another phase of the same story. The same man who once lifted 800 pounds now lifts himself, inch by inch, through pain most of us can't imagine. Different weights, same mindset. If you strip his story down to its core, it isn't about muscle, it's about identity. It's about what happens when your whole being revolves around something, and even when the world takes that thing away, you keep its fire alive inside you. That's why Ronnie Coleman still inspires millions today. Not because he was the biggest, but because he still is the strongest. Not physically, but spiritually. His rise showed what's possible. His fall showed what it costs. Both parts matter, because without the fall, the rise loses meaning. Without pain, strength means nothing. The price of greatness isn't tragedy, it's truth. Ronnie Coleman lived that truth louder and longer than anyone else. When I think about his story, I don't see a broken man. I see someone who reached the absolute limit of what a human can endure and smiled through it. That, to me, is the purest form of strength. He used to say, "Ain't nothing but a peanut." But we all know now, it was everything. When you listen to Ronnie Coleman speak, even now, years after the stage lights have faded, you realize he was never just about lifting. His philosophy wasn't born from books or speeches. It came from repetition, from showing up, from the kind of life that teaches you through pain. What he believed in was brutally simple. Hard work fixes almost everything, and excuses fix nothing. For Ronnie, success wasn't a mystery, it was math. You train, you eat, you rest, and you do it again. Every single day. No shortcuts, no secret formulas, no magic mindset, just time and consistency. That's what made his words so powerful. They weren't theory, they were proof. When people called him gifted, he always smiled and disagreed. "The only gift I got," he'd say, "is that I work harder than most people want to." He didn't mean it as arrogance. He meant it as perspective. The truth is, talent without discipline fades fast. Ronnie knew that better than anyone. He believed pain was part of the process, not something to avoid, but something to respect. Pain meant progress. Fatigue meant you were doing something right. That mindset doesn't just build muscle, it builds identity. He turned discomfort into a kind of meditation, a place where he could meet himself at his most honest. That's what separated him from everyone else. He didn't chase motivation, he chased purpose. Motivation is loud and temporary. Purpose is quiet and permanent. When the cameras are gone and the crowd stops cheering, purpose is what keeps you going. Ronnie had that. He didn't need hype, he had direction. There's a purity in that simplicity. In an age where everyone talks about balance, he was unapologetically unbalanced. He didn't want balance, he wanted greatness, and he was willing to pay for it. To him, the value of a life wasn't comfort, but clarity, knowing exactly what you want and having the courage to give it everything. Even now, confined by what his body can't do anymore, he still talks about joy. He laughs about the old days, about the pain, the surgeries, the lifts that made him famous. But he never sounds regretful. He sounds content, because he lived exactly as he believed, all in, no holding back. That, I think, is the real legacy of his philosophy. The idea that fulfillment doesn't come from avoiding struggle, but from embracing it. It's not about having everything. It's about giving everything. Ronnie Coleman didn't preach that lesson. He lived it, rep by rep, until his body gave out and his spirit didn't. There are few names in sports that survive time, and Ronnie Coleman is one of them. Not because of the trophies, though 8 Olympias are hard to forget, but because of what he represented. He became the blueprint for effort, proof that ordinary beginnings can lead to extraordinary outcomes if you're willing to pay the full price. Ask anyone who ever stepped into a gym, and they'll tell you. You can feel his presence, even if you've never seen him compete. The quotes, the training clips, the sound of "yeah, buddy" echoing through speakers. It's all become part of gym culture. But his real legacy isn't the memes or the numbers. It's the mindset. The idea that work, done with love, transforms people. Ronnie showed that greatness isn't reserved for the chosen. It's built, painfully, piece by piece. He made the impossible look normal, and in doing so, redefined what the human body and mind could do. Every athlete who trains beyond exhaustion, every beginner who refuses to quit after the first failure, whether they realize it or not, they're living a bit of his story. Even outside bodybuilding, his impact stretches far. He's spoken at schools, inspired soldiers, motivated people fighting through illness or addiction. Because at its core, his message isn't about lifting weights, it's about lifting yourself. His story reminds people that struggle isn't punishment, it's opportunity. That discipline can coexist with joy, that pain doesn't have to mean defeat, and maybe that's why he's still loved the way he is. Even now, when his body bears the marks of every battle he fought, people don't see a broken man. They see strength made human, the kind that doesn't fade when the lights go out. There's something timeless about that. A man who gave his body to the dream, but kept his heart intact. The kind of legend that doesn't just impress you, but teaches you how to live with more purpose. When I look back on his life, I don't see a cautionary tale. I see a reminder. Everything meaningful costs something. The question is whether you're willing to pay for it. Ronnie Coleman answered that question a long time ago, and even now when he says, "I'd do it all again," you believe him, because you know he means it. That's his legacy. Not the muscles, not the titles, but the proof that greatness isn't about what you gain. It's about what you're willing to give up.